What's up guys, Sean here, and today I want to talk about the Young Turks going after Tulsi Gabbard in a strange and completely ridiculous way. But before we get started, I just want to point out that I do have a Minds account. It is minds.com/actualjusticewarrior. If you have a Minds account, remember to go over and subscribe to my Minds. And if you don't have a Minds account, then create one and subscribe to my Minds. What do you think this is? You think you have a choice? You follow me here, you must follow me everywhere. By the way, all my links are in the description box, so you can follow me everywhere. Tulsi Gabbard, Democratic presidential candidate, recently did an appearance on Dave Rubin's show called The Rubin Report. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Dave Rubin and the structure of his show, he tends to do long-form interviews where he kind of lets the person he has on speak more than himself. So Dave Rubin isn't somebody who really challenges his guests because the point of his show is to hear out the person that's on his show. Now, I'm sure a ton of you are already familiar with Dave Rubin and you've already made up your minds about Dave Rubin, but the reason I started with Dave Rubin for context purposes is because Dave Rubin used to work at the Young Turks, and the people at the Young Turks do not like Dave Rubin, because after leaving and then going to Larry King and then leaving Larry King and doing his own independent show, Dave Rubin started pointing out all the things about the Young Turks as an organization that he didn't like, particularly Cenk's attacks on Sam Harris. Now, due to this fact, the Young Turks are predisposed to not liking Dave Rubin and not liking what he does on his show. Now, on top of the subject of the Young Turks video being a Dave Rubin interview, who they are already predisposed to hate, the Young Turks also appear to have it in for Tulsi Gabbard as a presidential candidate. They've been ridiculously harsh on her and overcritical of her, and honestly, it doesn't make a lot of sense why they would be doing so. As I've said many times to people in my own audience who are on the Tulsi Gabbard train, although she has a good foreign policy, a non-interventionist foreign policy that's really appealing to somebody like me, and although she's made statements about how identity politics is basically cancer, and it's ruining our politics and creating more division across America, Tulsi Gabbard, for the most part, especially in terms of domestic policy, is pretty well aligned with Bernie Sanders, and she has a history of being aligned with your Bernie Sanders and your more progressive wing of the Democratic Party on a ton of domestic issues. So for me, while I have no problem acknowledging that Tulsi Gabbard is the best option in the Democratic primary, that's really faint praise because I definitely disagree with a large portion of her positions. But I think the appeal of Tulsi Gabbard really comes down to she's somebody who disagrees with you, but somebody who doesn't give you the impression that she hates you. And I understand why people like that, and I understand why people respect that. I respect that myself. But I'm cautious because, again, she supports a lot of things that I disagree with, and just because she presents herself in a way that I think is admirable, and she's very honorable in her service, both past service and her continued service. She's still a major in the United States Armed Forces. That doesn't mean I'm going to overlook the issues in policy that I have. But by contrast, the Young Turks are a completely different story. Tulsi Gabbard as a candidate theoretically should line up with the beliefs of the Young Turks, their stated beliefs, more so than they're letting on. But because they appear to be in the tank for Bernie Sanders, and when I say appear to be in the tank for Bernie Sanders, I mean they're 100% in the tank for Bernie Sanders, and their second choice is Elizabeth Warren. Clearly, it's not ambiguous at all. They seem to hate Tulsi Gabbard, and they seem to perpetuate these vicious and often the same attacks that people who are ultra pro-war use against her. And they're indignant about it. They act as if the national press is all backing Tulsi Gabbard, and they are the sole outlet that is leveling the true critiques against her, when that's completely not the case.
It's frustrating to see just like the very careful way everyone treats this one particular candidate. First of all, no candidate is above criticism, not a single one, right?
Their coverage of her is wildly disproportionate to the coverage that they give other candidates, and even their own audience recognizes this amazing hypocrisy. For a quick example, remember when Elizabeth Warren took the DNA test and she found out that she was maybe, and I mean maybe because the DNA test results use results from Latin America that are not necessarily Native American, 1/1024th Native American. Now, obviously, this was a joke, and many people rightfully mocked Elizabeth Warren because she made it clear and obvious that she was using the prospect of Native American heritage to get jobs at places such as Harvard. But instead of reporting that accurately, since the Young Turks are huge fans of Elizabeth Warren, they covered it as if Elizabeth Warren disproved all of her detractors.
And it was obvious from day one, but I'm glad she took the DNA test. One, to just end it for good. Number two, so that we're clear that Donald Trump owes her $1 million. No ands, ifs, or buts. I'll get into contractual issues in a second.
Now look, you could say everybody has their favorite candidates, and when it comes to your favorite candidate, a lot of times you get ultra committed to them, and that creates blind spots for you and your coverage of that candidate. The last major candidate that I was in full support of was Congressman Ron Paul. And while there are some legitimate criticisms of Ron Paul, I've never seen them, and if you write them in the comments, you're not my friend anymore and leave this channel. But it's not just Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders that the Young Turks have provided cover for. When completely fair questions and criticisms of Kamala Harris's prosecutorial record were brought up on the Young Turks in a recent video, one of their panelists had this take on it.
So what we're not gonna do is demonize Kamala Harris for being the politician that everybody else has been. That was front and center on holding her accountable for the things that she did in terms of criminal justice with regards to people of color. But what we're not gonna do is pretend that she's the only one who, because white supremacy has been, like I said earlier, in effect for quite a long time. So to hold black people accountable for white supremacy is, respectability politics at its greatest. So I'm not going to participate in that.
That's right. According to Ada Rodriguez, aka the most regressive member of the Young Turks family, it is a tool of white supremacy to blame Kamala Harris for the things that she did as a prosecutor, even though she was fully in control of those actions. And in fact, a lot of times she went above and beyond what was called upon her to enact policies that she actually liked and supported. Now, the reason I'm laying this groundwork is because not only are the attacks against Tulsi Gabbard what I would characterize as smears by the Young Turks. Believe me, I've done a lot of videos about the Young Turks, and I know when they're smearing somebody and quote mining to smear somebody. But for some strange reason, the smears against Gabbard are unique to Tulsi Gabbard. Like, they don't treat even candidates that they don't like, that they don't consider real progressives, like Kamala Harris, as cruelly as they treat Tulsi Gabbard, because the panelists on the Young Turks, for whatever reason, have it in for her. Now, there's a couple of clips that they use to highlight the fact that Tulsi Gabbard is maybe a secret right-winger and she's accepting right-wing framing of the questions. I don't know what they expect from Tulsi Gabbard. Maybe they expect her to rewrite every single question that Dave Rubin brings up to fit their sensibilities. But considering the Young Turks have no interest in providing Gabbard with fair coverage, I don't see why Tulsi Gabbard should go out of her way to reframe all of Dave Rubin's questions in a way that TYT prefers.
I had Glenn back in here a couple days ago, and he said, he didn't even know that you were coming on because this just happened in the last day or so. But what he said was, I disagree with Tulsi on almost everything, but it's very obvious that she loves this country. And I think one of the things that's happening for sort of mainstream liberals, let's say not progressives, but sort of old school liberals, and then pretty much everyone on the right, is they're watching the candidates, the Democratic candidates, and there's this sense that they don't really love the country. Like, they really think it's so fundamentally broken or wrong or historically awful or some version of that, but that doesn't come across with you. That's not even a question. I'm just handing you something.
Yes, I am unabashed in my love for our country. It's what's motivated, these major decisions that I've made with what I want to do with my life.
And I retweeted one of your last tweets, which was like a 30-second clip where you talked about freedom and liberty and things like that. I love all those words, but those words now have been really associated with the right and not with Democrats. Do you find it odd that, right in there's a giant American flag in my control room and all of those things, and I've got the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence in there. Like, do you find it odd that it seems that the Democrats aren't embracing those things? There's a weird running from them.
I'm disheartened by it because of all of those who have sacrificed for our freedoms.
A lot of different things to touch on there, but the framing of Rubin's question is the top issue for me, because the way he framed that was, progressives don't love America, do you agree?
She basically said yes.
And she took the bait.
Now, if you listen carefully, the question that Dave Rubin asked is not the same question that TYT is pretending that he asked. What Dave Rubin said is that there's a perception among classical liberals and conservatives that Democrats running for president, specifically the presidential candidates, most of them, aren't coming off as people who love the country but have some issues with policies within the country, but they're actually coming off as people who hate the country. They fundamentally think that there's something wrong with the United States of America.
And she does not challenge Rubin on his right-wing, anti-progressive framing in a lot of these questions.
Yeah.
And by the way, so loving a country just means never critiquing it, never criticizing it, and showing a blind love and, like just a blind loyalty to it no matter what. Like it's a fascinating way of putting things. Like you can love the country, you can be loyal to the country, but you can have issues with how it's run. You can have issues with the history of the country. We're not allowed to find, the genocide of Native Americans questionable in this country's history. We're not allowed to talk about slavery. We're not allowed to talk about, what it was like before the civil rights era. We're not allowed to talk about what it's like now for a lot of people in disenfranchised groups.
Now, I think it's incredibly telling that the Young Turks are simultaneously feigning offense at the framing of this question and Tulsi accepting the framing of this question, but they also can't finish their point without taking shots at the United States of America and talking about the things that they hate about the country. There are multiple perceptions about the United States of America that many of its citizens hold, but the two main ones are the first, which is one that I'm in line with, that the United States of America is founded on a creed, an idea, and that idea is a noble idea. The idea that people should have individual liberty, and while the United States of America has not always lived up to that creed, in general, the United States is more good or more great than it is bad. The negatives are bugs, not features of the United States and the idea of the United States. The other view is that the United States is inherently corrupt because its foundations are white supremacy, sexism, racism, homophobia. I don't subscribe to that view, but it appears that the Young Turks and many of the Democratic presidential candidates do subscribe to that. They always attribute everything that goes on in the United States of America to slavery or some kind of racism. So to me, saying that the Democrats give off the perception that they don't like the United States of America on a fundamental level, that there's something fundamentally wrong with the United States of America, is not an unfair question to have.
Here we are in Nashville. I know this from my home state of Texas. Those places that formed the Confederacy, that this country was founded on white supremacy. And every single institution and structure that we have in our country still reflects the legacy of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow.
And when you go off of statements like Beto O'Rourke's or the Young Turks, it's not surprising that people come to those conclusions, that those people fundamentally don't like America. You can't say that the United States of America is fundamentally founded on white supremacy and then get mad at people when they say that you don't like that, because worked into their assumption that you don't like that is that white supremacy is bad. It would honestly be weirder if you didn't come away with that impression. The idea that you think that the United States is founded on all these hateful ideologies, but you love the United States as a core idea, doesn't really jive unless you're a horrible bigot. Now, the next clip that the Young Turks highlights as why Tulsi Gabbard is accepting Dave Rubin's right-wing framing when she definitely shouldn't is this question about the border and border security.
Immigration. I think there's a general sense that the candidates, the Democrats, are basically trying to outdo each other for open borders, something like that. A, do you think that's a fair way to start the question? And B, where do you sit on that?
I don't support open borders. Without secure borders, we don't really have a country. I think there's a few things that we've got to do when we're talking about immigration reform. One is we've got to have secure borders. This is not Trump's wall from sea to shining sea. It's about seeing, again, what makes sense. I look at things from a practical, objective-oriented standpoint. I'm a soldier, so I look at what's our objective? Secure the borders. In some places, it may make the most sense to have a wall or some kind of physical barrier in place. In other places, it won't make sense. So you use technology and use all the other tools that we have ultimately to accomplish that objective of security at the borders.
Let me pause you.
If you were an actual progressive and you went on that show, you would balk at the notion that Democrats are in favor of open borders. No one has said that ever. And any person that's gonna go on a right-wing talk show and listen to that talking point who identifies as someone who's on the left has to just sweep that away right away and say, that's not what we're talking about here.
So the Young Turks are really mad that people have the impression that the Democrats, especially the Democrats running for president, are for open borders. When did any Democrat say anything about open borders? And again, if you're looking for the actual words, open borders, then you're probably not going to find some Democrats that are advocating for that in those words. But again, the reason Dave Rubin points out that there's a perception of the Democratic Party and their presidential debates that all of the candidates are competing to advocate for open borders is because during the presidential debates, they keep talking about repealing sections of law that make it illegal to cross the border. They also advocate for healthcare for everybody who crosses the border illegally, and they advocate against deporting anybody who crosses the border that doesn't commit an additional crime. The idea that you think it's strange that people watching the debates at home listen to what's being said on the debates and think, okay, they're not in favor of laws criminalizing crossing the border. They're not in favor of deporting anybody if they don't commit an additional crime after they cross the border illegally. Maybe they're in favor of open borders. It's a completely logical conclusion to come to that the people who are advocating for that are for open borders because those are open borders policy. But somehow, and I mean somehow, it gets even more absurd and unself-aware at the Young Turks than I even thought humanly possible.
But no, she agrees with the framing, and perhaps that's because she voted present on a Republican bill that said we have to support our ICE officers and make sure that we don't abolish ICE, when people like Beto O'Rourke voted against that.
That's right. The Young Turks are mad at Tulsi Gabbard for voting present on a bill that says that we don't want to repeal ICE, which is Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Oh, did I forget to mention that before? The Democratic Party has also taken up the mantra, and Democratic presidential candidates have also taken up the mantra, that we should abolish ICE, which enforces immigration laws. So, if you're in favor of making crossing the border into the country a non-crime, if you're in favor of getting rid of all deportations for anything other than a serious felony, and you're in favor of abolishing the police organization that is meant to prosecute and deter illegal border crossings, then it's not a stretch to say that you're in favor of open borders. And if you're criticizing Tulsi Gabbard for not getting on board for that, then again, it is not a stretch to say that you are in favor of open borders, even if you don't say, I'm in favor of open borders. Literally not saying those words, but advocating for all of the policies that go along with that are the same thing. Those are equivalent positions. These aren't dramatic leaps that are completely disconnected from reality. These are logical progressions based on the stated positions of many of the Democratic candidates. And by the way, I want to make it clear, it's not every Democratic candidate on the stage. Joe Biden has clearly said that he's not in favor of decriminalizing border crossings. Bernie Sanders has a record of actually being reasonably harsh on illegal immigration because he believes a large influx of low-wage workers are good for corporations and bad for union workers. So while there are differences in immigration policy on that stage, I don't think it's a crazy question, or Tulsi Gabbard is a secret pandering right-winger for accepting the framing of the question that the Democrats appear to be during the debates competing to see who's the most in favor of open borders, especially when you consider that the candidates that do have more moderate positions on illegal immigration are being attacked by the more radical candidates. Now, as if all the things that I pointed out aren't ridiculous enough, as if they aren't clear smears enough, the Young Turks decided to go one step further and call Tulsi Gabbard a racist, bigot, Islamophobe.
Yes. And look, I thought that, her resigning from the DNC was really brave, and I really supported her anti-interventionist foreign policy until I took a further look and realized that a lot of it is based in dislike of Muslim people.
That's right, Tulsi Gabbard's non-interventionist foreign policy, a foreign policy that, according to this woman who is not Ana Kasparian, made her originally warm to Tulsi Gabbard, isn't because Tulsi Gabbard doesn't want more American troops to die in the Middle East. It isn't because she thinks that the Middle Eastern wars are counterproductive, like she said multiple times for years. The reality is, Tulsi Gabbard doesn't want to intervene in the Middle East primarily because she secretly hates the Muslims. Because bombing Muslim countries is racist and Islamophobic, but also not bombing Muslim countries is racist and Islamophobic. Now, normally when I hear something incredibly dumb and ridiculous, I usually attribute it to a ridiculous person saying something incredibly dumb. But I decided to look into these allegations that Tulsi Gabbard has a unique hatred for the Muslims, and what I found out, what is undergirding these allegations, is absolutely stunning and amazing.
He's rubbing shoulders with Narendra Modi.
It turns out, as far as I could tell, one of the reasons that Tulsi Gabbard is considered anti-Islamic by the far left is because Tulsi Gabbard is a practicing Hindu, or she's Hindu inherited. And in places like India, we've seen a rise in Hindu nationalism as a response to Islamic terror and Islamic violence in the country. So people in the media perceive India as becoming more Islamophobic, and since Tulsi Gabbard is a Hindu, then she must, for some reason, be a Hindu nationalist, and thus be Islamophobic. Which, by the way, the fact that the Young Turks and progressives are pushing this narrative is completely absurd, because if you flipped around Hindu and Muslim and you said that Tulsi Gabbard was an Islamic nationalist just because there was a rise of Islamic nationalism and she happened to share their beliefs, you would be called Islamophobic. But since there's no such thing as Hindu-phobic in the United States of America, I guess it's okay to say that Tulsi Gabbard is somehow guilty of being a Hindu nationalist because of her religion, even though that would be completely unacceptable with other religions. Now look, I don't know what's going on with the Young Turks and the far left when it comes to Tulsi Gabbard, but I think I've demonstrated in this video that many of the attacks that are leveled against Tulsi are completely unfair and ridiculous. Honestly, what I think this really boils down to is that the mainstream media are not supportive of Tulsi Gabbard's foreign policy, and the more left-leaning and progressive media don't like the fact that she doesn't really talk about identity politics the way that they think that she should. They think that she should be playing the victim. They think that she should be talking about the plight of the marginalized all the time, and condemning America for every single thing that it's ever done, ever. But Tulsi doesn't want to play that. She doesn't want to present herself as somebody who fundamentally hates America. She wants to present herself as somebody who loves America, but wants to make the country better, and I think that's what they can't stand. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can follow me on all my social medias, subscribe for more content. If you want to support me, you could do so via one-time donation on PayPal or Venmo, or you could do so monthly on Patreon or Subscribestar. This has been me talking about TYT smearing Tulsi for virtually no good reason. Till next time.